Think you know how Jimmy McGill became the criminal lawyer Saul Goodman? The Breaking Bad prequel took us on a 6-season journey through the Albuquerque underworld, showing exactly how a struggling public defender transformed into Walter White's sleazy attorney. From his complicated relationship with his brother Chuck to his romance with fellow lawyer Kim Wexler, I'm breaking down every major storyline from Better Call Saul in just 25 minutes. Are you ready to witness the making of a criminal lawyer? Season 1, Slippin' Jimmy tries to go straight. When we first meet Jimmy McGill, he's miles away from the colorful Saul Goodman we know from Breaking Bad. He's a struggling public defender in Albuquerque, working out of a cramped office in the back of a nail salon. Jimmy grew up as a con artist in Cicero, Illinois, earning the nickname Slippin' Jimmy for faking accidents to scam money. But he's trying to leave that life behind, inspired by his brilliant older brother Chuck. Chuck McGill was once a legendary lawyer and founding partner at prestigious firm Hamlin, and McGill, HHM. But now he's housebound, convinced he suffers from electromagnetic hypersensitivity, a condition doctors believe is psychological, not physical. Jimmy dutifully cares for Chuck, bringing him supplies and keeping all electronics away from the house. While studying for the bar exam in HHM's mailroom, Jimmy met and fell for Kim Wexler, another aspiring lawyer. Unlike Jimmy, Kim got hired at HHM after passing the bar. This difference in their career paths creates a tension that will define their relationship throughout the series. Jimmy's attempts at going legitimate keep hitting walls. When he tries to land wealthy clients, the Kettlemans, as part of his elder law practice, his scheme backfires spectacularly. He hires 2 skateboarding scammers to fake an accident with Mrs. Kettleman's car, but they target the wrong vehicle, belonging to none other than drug dealer Tuco Salamanca's grandmother. This mistake nearly gets Jimmy killed. Tuco drags Jimmy and the skaters to the desert, planning to execute them all. Only the intervention of Tuco's more level-headed associate Nacho Varga saves Jimmy's life. This brush with death introduces Jimmy to Albuquerque's criminal underworld, a connection that will eventually consume him. Jimmy also forms an unlikely friendship with parking lot attendant Mike Ehrmantraut, a former Philadelphia cop haunted by his past. Mike now works odd jobs to support his daughter-in-law Stacy and granddaughter Kaylee following his son Maddie's death. When Mike needs legal help after being questioned about the deaths of 2 corrupt cops, whom he actually killed in revenge for Maddie's murder, Jimmy steps in, beginning their long partnership. The season's turning point comes when Jimmy discovers the Sandpiper Crossing retirement home is systematically overcharging its elderly residents. With Chuck's help, Jimmy builds a major class action lawsuit against Sandpiper. Believing this case will finally legitimize him, Jimmy brings it to HHM, expecting to work on it alongside his brother. Instead, Chuck betrays him. We learn that Chuck has actively prevented Jimmy from being hired at HHM, believing his brother will always be a con man at heart. Slippin' Jimmy with a law degree is like a chimp with a machine gun. This devastating revelation shows Jimmy that no matter how hard he tries to reform, his own brother will never believe in him. Heartbroken, Jimmy briefly returns to his con artist ways, reuniting with his old friend Marco in Cicero. When Marco dies of a heart attack during a scam, Jimmy returns to Albuquerque with a new outlook. The season ends with Jimmy driving away from a job interview, deciding, "I know what stopped me, and it's never stopping me again." His transformation has begun. Season 2, One Foot in Each World. The second season finds Jimmy walking a tightrope between legitimacy and his natural con artist instincts. He accepts a position at Davis & Main, a respected law firm working alongside HHM on the Sandpiper case. They give him everything he thought he wanted: corner office, company car, expense account. But Jimmy feels suffocated by the corporate structure. Jimmy's relationship with Kim deepens as he introduces her to small-time cons, like tricking a loudmouth investor into buying them expensive tequila. Kim enjoys the rush but remains committed to her ethical boundaries, a stark contrast to Jimmy's fluid morality. When Jimmy creates a TV commercial for the Sandpiper case without getting proper approval, it causes problems for Kim at HHM, where she's punished for not controlling him. Though Kim secures Mesa Verde Bank as a major client for HHM, Howard still keeps her in the doghouse. Fed up with the constraints at Davis and Maine, Jimmy deliberately gets himself fired, while keeping his signing bonus, by wearing colorful suits, playing bagpipes in his office, and refusing to flush the toilets. He and Kim decide to quit HHM, but instead of forming one firm together, they create separate practices sharing office space, a symbolic representation of their diverging paths. When Chuck manipulates Mesa Verde into staying with HHM instead of following Kim to her new practice, Jimmy crosses a serious line. He breaks into Chuck's house at night, alters Mesa Verde documents, and creates a paper trail making it look like Chuck made a major error. When the mistake is discovered, Mesa Verde leaves HHM for Kim's firm. A suspicious Chuck lures the copy shop clerk who helped Jimmy into his store, but Chuck's condition overwhelms him and he collapses, hitting his head. Jimmy watches this happen from across the street and after a moment's hesitation, runs to help his brother. Meanwhile, Mike gets entangled with the Salamanca family. When Tuco assaults him in a staged confrontation, Tuco goes to prison, but his uncle Hector Salamanca threatens Mike's family to force him to claim a gun was his. Mike retaliates by targeting Hector's drug operation, but before he can assassinate the cartel member, he receives a mysterious note on his car windshield that simply says, "Don't." The season ends with Chuck secretly recording Jimmy confessing to the Mesa Verde document tampering, setting up a brotherly showdown that will change everything. Season 3: Consequences and Confrontations. The legal and personal battle between Jimmy and Chuck characterize Season 3. When Jimmy discovers that Chuck recorded his confession, he breaks into Chuck's house and destroys the tape in a rage. But it's a trap. Chuck has witnesses present, including Howard Hamlin, and Jimmy is arrested for breaking and entering. Rather than pursuing criminal charges, Chuck convinces the district attorney to send the case to the New Mexico Bar Association, threatening Jimmy's law license. This leads to one of the show's most riveting sequences, a disciplinary hearing where Kim represents Jimmy against Chuck. Their strategy is to expose Chuck's mental illness as psychosomatic. In a brilliant courtroom maneuver, Jimmy reveals he had planted a battery in Chuck's pocket, which Chuck carried unknowingly for hours. When confronted with this evidence, Chuck has a public meltdown, ranting about how Jimmy has defecated through a sunroof and always cuts corners. The outburst costs Chuck his credibility, and Jimmy escapes with just a 1-year suspension from practicing law. During his suspension, Jimmy adopts the alias Saul Goodman to sell his prepaid TV commercial slots to local businesses. This is our first glimpse of his future identity, though not yet as a lawyer. The mysterious note that stopped Mike from killing Hector came from Gus Fring, the calculating restaurant owner and drug distributor we know from Breaking Bad. Gus hires Mike to disrupt Hector's drug operation while keeping his own involvement hidden. When Hector demands that Nacho's legitimate father allow them to use his upholstery shop for drug trafficking, Nacho secretly replaces Hector's heart medication with fake pills. Jimmy's law suspension puts financial strain on his shared office with Kim, who takes on too many clients to compensate. Exhausted, she falls asleep while driving and crashes her car, breaking her arm. This accident makes Jimmy realize the toll his actions are taking on the woman he loves. Chuck, humiliated by his courtroom breakdown, works to overcome his condition. He forces himself to endure electricity and returns to HHM, seemingly recovered. But Jimmy's vengeful tip to Chuck's malpractice insurance company causes HHM's rates to skyrocket unless Chuck is supervised by another attorney. Howard pays $3 million from his own pocket to force Chuck into retirement, rather than allow him to sue their insurer. Devastated by losing the law career that defined him, Chuck relapses into his condition, tears apart his house looking for electrical sources, and deliberately kicks over a lantern, setting his house ablaze with himself inside. The season ends with this shocking suicide, setting up the guilt that will haunt Jimmy moving forward. Season 4: Separate Paths. Season 4 opens in the aftermath of Chuck's suicide. While everyone around him grieves, Jimmy seems strangely unmoved, compartmentalizing his emotions. Howard confesses he believes he caused Chuck's death by forcing him out, and Jimmy lets him believe this rather than admit his own role in his brother's downfall. Jimmy spends his law suspension selling burner phones to criminals under the Saul Goodman name. When his legal license is up for reinstatement, the bar committee denies him for seeming insincere. He didn't mention Chuck once in his hearing. Kim suggests Jimmy needs to confront his feelings about his brother's death. On his second attempt, Jimmy delivers a seemingly heartfelt speech about wanting to make Chuck proud. It works, and he's reinstated. But in a gut-wrenching moment afterward, Jimmy reveals to Kim it was all an act. "Did you see those suckers? That one asshole was crying." When Kim asks what's next, Jimmy shocks her by announcing he'll no longer practice under the McGill name. He'll be Saul Goodman. The mask is becoming the man. Mike begins working security for Gus Fring's legitimate businesses, while also helping oversee construction of a secret underground meth lab. Gus hires German engineer Werner Ziegler and his crew for this complex project, housing them in a warehouse compound for months. Hector suffers the stroke Nacho engineered but doesn't die. Gus ensures Hector receives the best medical care, not out of compassion, but because he wants his enemy to live in a disabled state as prolonged revenge. With Hector incapacitated, his nephew Lalo Salamanca arrives to take over operations, bringing a dangerous unpredictability to the cartel business. When Werner, homesick after months underground, escapes to meet his wife, it threatens to expose Gus's operation. Lalo begins tracking Werner, forcing Mike to make a heartbreaking choice. He executes Werner to protect the operation, cementing his role as Gus's enforcer. Kim, increasingly disillusioned with her corporate law work for Mesa Verde, takes on pro bono criminal defense cases that give her the satisfaction corporate law doesn't. This pull between profitable work and meaningful work mirrors Jimmy's internal struggle. Though Kim still maintains ethical boundaries, Jimmy readily crosses. Season 5, Breaking Bad Together. Season 5 sees Jimmy fully embracing his Saul Goodman persona, building a clientele of petty criminals with his speedy justice for you approach. Meanwhile, Kim takes on a pro bono case defending Everett Acker, whose home Mesa Verde wants to demolish for a call center. This puts her in direct conflict with her own client. In a shocking development, Kim suggests she and Jimmy scam her client to help Acker. Jimmy represents Acker against Mesa Verde, and therefore against Kim. Deploying increasingly outrageous tactics, they eventually discover Mesa Verde's logo was stolen from a photographer, forcing the bank to settle with Acker. This experience awakens something in Kim. Rather than being repulsed by the scam, she seems energized by it. She quits her job at Schweikart and Coakley to focus on pro bono work, then proposes marriage to Jimmy. Partly so their communications will have spousal privilege protection. Jimmy's connection to the cartel deepens when Lalo Salamanca hires him to represent drug dealer Domingo Crazy 8 Molina. Jimmy negotiates a deal making Domingo an informant for the DEA, but in a twist, the information he provides is actually controlled by Lalo to damage Gus's operation. When Lalo is arrested for murder, he sends Jimmy to collect his $7 million bail money in the desert. This errand turns dangerous when gunmen attack Jimmy. Mike Ehrmantraut, working for Gus, saves him, and they must trek through the desert with the money. This harrowing experience traumatizes Jimmy but bonds him closer to Mike. After posting Lalo's bail, Jimmy lies about his desert ordeal. But Lalo becomes suspicious when he finds Jimmy's car riddled with bullet holes. When Lalo confronts them, Kim stands up to him fearlessly, convincing him to leave. This moment solidifies Kim's transformation. She's now fully in the game. Gus sends assassins to kill Lalo at his Mexico compound, with Nacho helping by opening the gate. But Lalo escapes, killing all but one assassin whom he sends back to tell Gus the mission succeeded. The season wraps up with Kim suggesting they destroy Howard Hamlin's career to force a settlement in the Sandpiper case, a shocking proposal coming from the once ethical Kim. Jimmy is actually unnerved by this dark turn in the woman he loves. Season 6, The Final Transformation. The extended final season completes everyone's transformation. Jimmy and Kim execute an elaborate scheme to destroy Howard's reputation, making it appear he's using cocaine and soliciting prostitutes. The plan culminates in drugging Howard before a Sandpiper mediation meeting, causing him to make wild accusations that force an early settlement. A humiliated Howard confronts Jimmy and Kim at their apartment, accurately calling out their scheme. In a shocking moment that changes everything, Lalo Salamanca walks in and calmly shoots Howard in the head. This collateral damage, as an innocent man killed in their living room, breaks something in Kim and Jimmy's relationship that can never be repaired. Nacho has been on the run since the failed hit on Lalo. When cornered by the Salamancas, he negotiates with Gus for his father's safety, then takes his own life rather than suffer torture. One of the show's most tragic and dignified deaths. Lalo forces Jimmy to send Kim to Gus's house as a distraction, while he gathers evidence about Gus's secret lab. Gus realizes the plan and confronts Lalo at the lab site. In a tense showdown, Gus kills Lalo using a hidden gun he'd stashed earlier. Mike buries both Lalo and Howard beneath the lab floor, the same lab where Walter White will later cook meth. The horror of Howard's death causes Kim to quit law entirely and leave Jimmy. In a devastating scene, she tells him they're poisoned together. Without Kim's moral compass, Jimmy fully embraces the Saul Goodman persona as a coping mechanism, moving into a gaudy mansion, wearing colorful suits, and representing Albuquerque's criminal element. We've reached the Saul Goodman of Breaking Bad. In a flash forward to events after Breaking Bad, Jimmy lives in Omaha as Gene Takovich, managing a Cinnabon. When a taxi driver named Jeff recognizes him as Saul Goodman, Jimmy returns to his conning ways to neutralize the threat. But after a phone call with Kim, now living a bland existence in Florida, Gene goes into a self-destructive spiral, pulling increasingly risky scams. When Jeff's mother, Marion, discovers Gene's true identity, she calls the police. Arrested and facing trial, Jimmy plans to use his legal skills to minimize his sentence. But upon learning Kim confessed everything about Howard's death, Jimmy has a change of heart. In the courtroom, he rejects his plea deal and publicly confesses to all his crimes, including his role in Walter White's empire and Howard's death, taking full responsibility to spare Kim. Sentenced to 86 years in prison, Jimmy finally reclaims his real identity, telling the court, "The name's McGill. I'm James McGill." The series ends with Kim visiting Jimmy in prison, sharing a cigarette just as they did in the series premiere. As she leaves, Jimmy gives her his trademark finger guns, a bittersweet acknowledgement of all they've lost and the small piece of connection that remains. Better Call Saul masterfully showed how a fundamentally decent man with a talent for cutting corners became the criminal lawyer we meet in Breaking Bad. But more than that, it became a nuanced character study about the choices that define us, the relationships that shape us, and the consequences that follow. The tragedy of Jimmy McGill isn't just that he became Saul Goodman, it's that he didn't have to. Unlike Walter White, who claimed to break bad for his family but really did it for himself, Jimmy's descent came from a combination of his brother's lack of faith in him, his own inability to play by the rules, and, most surprisingly, his love for Kim Wexler, who ultimately crossed moral lines he never anticipated. In the end, Jimmy McGill's story isn't just about a transformation from struggling lawyer to criminal accomplice. It's about a man who lost himself and, in the final moments, found redemption by finally taking responsibility for his actions. From Slippin' Jimmy to Saul Goodman to Gene Takovich, and finally back to Jimmy McGill, his journey stands as one of television's greatest character studies, and that's the story of Better Call Saul. It's all good, man, until it isn't.